Hello YouTubers. In talking to many people, I often get asked about my impression of the Land Rover's terrain response system, so I thought I would make a video about it. Often in video comments you get people suggesting try disabling the traction control. I think when they say that they meant the DSC, or try different terrain response mode. But it's sort of good to understand why. I'm not a Land Rover engineer, but I've driven a few of those now through various terrains, and this is my account of how they seem to work for me. Of course, happy to always take feedback, corrections and whatnot, and the usual Land Rovers will never see more than a dirt parking lot comment. The first mode outside of general is grass, gravel and snow. If I were to describe this mode, this is the least aggressive of all the modes. The throttle response is made milder across the range to prevent any sudden wheel spin, especially moving off from a standstill, to avoid digging into the grass and gravel. We sometimes use this mode in a paddock, especially when it's been like super wet after a storm. The locking mechanism isn't as violent either. In fact, I would describe it as super mild, and this would be a great general mode for long dirt road type use for comfort and safety. It's great in preventing the accidental loss of traction by a mistake by the driver. When coming from a more aggressive mode, it can almost feel like the throttle is broken. I almost never use this mode because we don't have snow here in Australia, and we rarely need this mode even in grass on a paddock unless it's been really quite slippery, say from frost or after a storm. Unfortunately, I've never driven in snow, but I'm sure this is where the mode excels. The next mode is mud and ruts. This is a really interesting mode. It's more of a general off-road mode for me. The throttle is very much more responsive than the grass, gravel and snow mode. A little more so than in general road driving even. Also important to note is that this also allows for wheel spin so that the tires can clear itself off of mud, so the locking is somewhat aggressive. I know it's always confusing because ruts also mean deep holes where tires will spin and you want to automatically redirect that spin to the wheel with traction as quickly as possible, which it does, but not quite as aggressively as the rock crawl mode. So we'll talk about rock crawl mode a bit later in the video, but this mode allows for a much wheel spin while it works out which wheel to send power to. The throttle response, however, is quite aggressive in this mode, so it's useful when you need to gain momentum quickly. So this is a good mode to use in those situations where you have a short run up, for example, and want to still have good steering control. In general, this is a really good general purpose mode to be in for many of the local trails here in Australia. In bigger ruts and deeper holes where one wheel is in the air, you simply hold the throttle and let the system work out which wheel to send the torque to. Takes a little bit of time, which catches up many drivers not used to the system, I find, because people will simply just lift off throttle. I found also with this mode, as the hill descent control is activated, it can be quite uncomfortable. I tended to choose this mode for creek crossings, especially if the creek bed is mixed with rocks and mud. It gives a good balance between enough throttle response and speed, yet provides that locking capability when it's actually needed. The next mode is sand mode. This is one of the most confusing modes around. I think this mode modulates the throttle response substantially, but also affects the gears, so you're holding a typically lower gear than the other modes, so you're revving at the peak torque and power range of the engine all the time, as you do with sand to maintain momentum. However, on the initial takeoff, the throttle response is really greatly reduced to avoid digging into the sand, but more aggressive towards the higher rev range for those immediate power requirements on the dunes. This mode takes a little bit getting used to if you're not quite used to it. The next mode is rock crawl mode, and unfortunately this mode is only available in certain models and typically with low range boxes. This mode is the closest mode to a fully locked vehicle on all 3 axles. The throttle response is also greatly desensitized to give you that precise control to step over rocks and bumps, but also holds a lower gear to give precise movement. You'll also find the steering response is heavy or heavier, as it wants to ensure the wheels on both sides turn at pretty close to each other, mimicking a locker, so the steering will suddenly feel quite weighted. I find when doing non-muddy hill climbs with articulation or loose rocks, this is the mode I'm most likely to use, even though the name suggests that mud and ruts might be the better mode to be in. I found this to react quicker to send torque to the wheels that needs it and prevent spin. It prevents digging up rocks and loose bits off the trail. Also in this mode, the desensitized throttle response together with the hill descent feels super aggressive. I'm guessing this is designed to reduce any backward movement or slip in case or slip in any direction. It also feels super controlled on your throttle, which is handy but can be quite disorientating at first until you get used to it. The risk is the transition from throttle to braking can result in the vehicle unsettling itself, so a bit of practice really helps. I guess this is the closest to single pedal driving on a Land Rover that I can think of. I like this mode for rocky hill climbs that don't require big momentum. With climbs that require a fair bit of momentum, I would still choose to use the mud and ruts mode, unless it's only like a tiny bump. This also is a good mode to use on steep, loose downhills, as it tends to keep a low gear to work together with the hill descent control, even though I would almost always put the gearbox into manual mode myself. A special mention here, how does the Evoque behave on very steep hill starts without low range gearbox? This is really interesting how Evoque does it on very steep loose terrain when you try and take off, because it doesn't have a low range gearbox. The Evoque seems to lock its wheels whilst revving the engine to a high enough range in the torque band before releasing the brakes. It will repeat this process until the car gains enough speed and momentum to be in the engine's torque band before allowing it to climb the rest of the hill, which I thought was super interesting. I'm guessing this is quite taxing on the torque converter and the gearbox, but there you go. So next question is, what do I think of terrain response versus the other systems, or just a manual system? Well, I think it's really helpful. You simply switch the mode you need and drive, but there is a danger in that many people think the car is invincible. Give no regard to things like tire pressure, terrain, the tires, and end up hopelessly bogged or in big trouble. So I think in many ways it is super helpful to support the driver and takes away the technicalities of driving in different terrain, but it can also present a danger. Personally, I do prefer to have manual control, even though in some circumstances the terrain response system works amazingly. I think it's a personal choice. I prefer to choose a lower gear when I need to. I feel like it is less stressful on the mechanical components, especially the brakes, where brake traction control is concerned to mimic those of a mechanical locker. The stress is upstream of the drive shaft and CV, whereas brake traction control is always at the wheel, where you risk more mechanical failure. Think drive shaft and CV, and I think you'll get the idea. Also, if you're relying on electronics, which we found after multiple river crossings, and constant start-stops have resulted us in getting stranded with limited suspension modes due to sensor failures. So you have to account for that. Yeah. So we have a suspension fault. Unfortunately, I think, let me show you the warning. I think we've drained the battery a little bit. Battery's probably not up to the job. So suspension faults popped up. We were just approaching Cannibal Creek. And I didn't know whether we would lose any function, so we decided, because we don't know if there were any escape routes in case anything happened, and I wasn't able to go on
off-road height, I thought the best course of action is actually to abandon ship.
River crossings and suspension modes aren't exactly the best of friends. Well, I hope that gives you a bit of an impression. Please let me know if you have any feedback or comments below, or have any questions. I'll try and answer. But remember, none of the traction control system can alter the laws of physics, so it's really important to understand your four-wheel drive. So get some lessons from a proper professional if you can before you venture off and do anything that might put yourself, your vehicle, or others in danger. As I said before, I'm not a Land Rover engineer, but I've driven on them a bit now across a few different terrains, with the exception of super hard stuff. This is just my impression on how each of the modes best suited our purpose. Hope this comes in handy for you, and good luck! Enjoy the trails!